Well, I'll compare Anderson to someone, Anil Kumble. It's a case of longevity and not actually being an absolute wizard.
It's true,
Big
yeah.
Zach Crawley, who's just cemented his place in the team for the next 12 years, and I'm excited for what he's going to bring in the future. Despite having good partners, he was always the alpha in the attack, and just an incredible bowler. And he's always my number one when posed with this conundrum.
Yeah, Dan.
It's a miracle! Oh, yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle. Oh, the ball is close! He's given him! He's given him! Peter Siddle's got a hat-trick on his birthday!
Welcome back to the On the Ball podcast. This is episode 55 of the show. Today I'm joined by the usual Christian Pilcher. Welcome back, mate.
Thanks, mate. Good to be back.
Yep, pleasure to have you on as always. Today we are here, as you can tell by my kit if you're watching on YouTube, and Pilcher's kit. We're here to talk about the cricket. Last night was the culmination of the England versus Pakistan Test series. First of all, what do you think of the series?
Well, I'll start off by saying the series was pretty much ruined by the English weather, which it so often does. But I don't know. I thought it was the play that we did see was. I thought it was a step up from the West Indies series, although I was a bit let down by Pakistan. I thought they'd put up a bit more of a fight, but overall, not bad at all. Apart from the rain.
Yeah, well, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty when the cricket was actually on as well. So I almost do think Pakistan were saved a little bit from a pretty embarrassing series.
Yeah.
Like you said, we were expecting a lot more. I was hoping for a really close series after the West Indies. They fought hard, but there was a clear difference in quality there. So I thought Pakistan would take it to the English, and they just didn't.
I do think England stepped up a lot, though.
Yeah, that's true. And I think we can put it down to a lot of it down to Pakistan coming in fresh off lockdown. England had already had 3 tests under the belt. I think that's a huge factor, especially when you are playing away from home, because you've got to get used to the conditions and you don't have any practice games except for against yourself. So I think a lot of Pakistan's failure has to be brought down to that, because I reckon on a normal situation it would have been a fairly tight test. I think England would have come out winners probably 8 times out of 10, but I think the fight would have been a lot closer. And who knows, the rain could have stopped us from seeing a couple brilliant Pakistan fight backs and stuff like that. But yeah, overall, the rain really dictated the series, unfortunately. In the second 2 tests, I think there was only a combined 4 or 5 days worth of play out of a possible 10. So yeah, the rain just really nuked it. But in terms of the players that impressed you, who stood out for you?
Well, someone who we'll get to in a little bit, but the main one for me was Zach Crawley. Big Zach Crawley, who's just cemented his place in the team for the next 12 years, and I'm excited for what he's going to bring in the future. But yeah, he was a beast.
Yeah, it was actually interesting. The guys who were probably least guaranteed in the lineup, if you know what I mean, their jobs weren't that secure. They really stood out. Crawley and Butler being the main two. Butler was part of 2 match-winning partnerships in the first test and the last test, and as we said, Crawley, when given his chance, really stood up. So it looks like they're both locked in for, as you said, a long time. They're both, well, Butler's obviously a lot older than Crawley, but he's still got a lot of age left. We were pretty skeptical of Butler going into the summer, but you have to give him credit, really. He's come out probably one of the most secure people in the spot. I think his keeping's still pretty average, and that's generous. I think it's pretty bad, actually. Cal, I didn't actually see it, but Cal Elvins, who's been on the show before, he was telling me there was a nick of James Anderson. He actually had an air swing like didn't get a glove to the ball.
Yeah, I saw
And
that
that's
one.
pretty embarrassing. Like that's pretty bad. Like you have to be seriously average to be doing that. But yeah, I think his batting will keep him in the side for long enough, and it's not like, well, I haven't seen the last couple of results in the county championship, but I know Bairstow's first couple innings in that tournament, he didn't make too many runs. I think he made a 50, but yeah, nothing big enough for him to come back into the side. And then I'm not sure who else really. I guess Folkes, but he hasn't really been able to play because he's been in the bubble with the boys. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with the lineup once Stokes comes back. I think the obvious option is just to resort back to 7 batsmen, have Butler at 7, Pope down at 6, Stokes 5, Root 4, Crawley 3. Do you think that's what they'll do?
Yeah, I think that's probably the most ideal lineup. I wouldn't be surprised if they do that.
Yeah, that all of a sudden becomes a fairly deep batting lineup after one stage, and this summer looking pretty shaky. But it has to be said, Joe Root, he really needs to step up.
Yep.
I think his average is below 40 in the last 2 calendar years. Not calendar years, the last 2 years, sorry. It's just really average, really. I think he's scored 100 since the World Cup. And he doesn't even look bad. That's the thing. If you watch him bat, he looks like Joe Root as always, but he just can't convert 20s and 30s into big scores. Even when he gets over 20 and 30, he struggles to convert 60s and 70s. So, yeah, I think Joe Root really needs to sort out his game. I think at this point, you could probably put it down to mental concentration, which is quite surprising because he seems like someone who wouldn't struggle with that. But it's definitely not his skill set. Like he's good enough to make runs, so that's really the only thing it could be, just not concentrating for long periods of time. But yeah, he's not in trouble exactly, but realistically, if you look at that top 7, maybe next to Rory Burns, he's probably the least secure in the team. So that's quite an interesting one for England to deal with, because I don't think there's a clear other captain candidate if he does continue this poor run of form. So I think the England selectors will just be praying he starts scoring runs soon.
Yep.
In terms of the bowlers, anything to note there or not really?
Well, the main 2 standouts were Broady and our man Jimmy. Broad's just a consistent beast. I don't know why he was ever left out of the team in the West Indies series, especially on home turf. And then obviously Jimmy, who we're about to rave over, he's just brought up the 600. But yeah, pretty much those 2.
Yeah, Jimmy. I was questioning whether he's even in England's best 3 bowlers going into this series, and he shut up the haters, I'm not a hater, but the doubters. Like it's still a tough one to crack, because obviously that means you've got to drop one of Jofra and Wokes, but I think Jimmy after this series has shown he has to be in there. Maybe away from home, it's another story, it's another conversation, but yeah, I think in England he's a lock next to Stuart Broad. And then in terms of the visitors, Pakistan, it's hard because 2 of the games they were really behind the 8 ball from day one. So it's hard to really judge them. I think Mohammad Rizwan was probably their most impressive player. I think he scored a couple big 50s. I don't think he scored 100. No, I don't think so. But I think he scored a 70 in the first innings of the 3rd test, and then in the washed out one, I think he scored 75 or something. So he was pretty handy. And he just showed they had a pretty deep batting lineup, because I think he was coming in at 7 for the second 2 tests. But the issue really was a lack of consistency from the top 4. They seemed, all of them had one big score really. Well, Bubba and Asad Shafiq, they were pretty disappointing. I think Bubba had 150 and Asad Shafiq had absolutely nothing. But yeah, Azhar Ali, Shah Masood, they couldn't fire together. They both scored 100, but then apart from that, they did pretty averagely. So that's what let down the Pakistan team. They couldn't really have any big partnerships, unlike the English, who always had 2 going at the same time, which really set up the test matches. So yeah, I have to say, a bit disappointing from Bubba Azam. It is only a 3 test series, so it's easy to just have a bit of bad luck. But for someone who was coming in the hottest batsman in the world, I think he let down everyone a little bit. And he probably once again suggested that like the Kohli comparisons and stuff like that are a bit premature at this point.
Yep.
I was impressed with the Bid Ali though. He wasn't a certainty in that opening spot going into the series, but he didn't have any big scores or anything. But technically, he looked solid. Reminded me a bit of like a Chris Rogers, just an absolute workhorse. Shah Massoud's going to take the glory, but he'll be like by his side fighting hard. So I really like him as well. And then in terms of the bowlers, once again, I have to admit they probably were pretty disappointing. Apart from Muhammad Abbas, who tried really hard and was really impressive on in a couple spells, I think Naseem Shah and Shaheen Afridi kind of showed how inexperienced and new to the Test cricket world they are. They just didn't look like threatening the batsmen at all.
Yep.
And they just, well, as we saw in the first innings of the third Test, they just couldn't take wickets. So yeah, that was pretty disappointing, I have to say, because that looked like a pretty spicy pace attack going into the first Test.
The pace attack was definitely a letdown because Yasir Shah ended up having to take a pretty hefty workload because those boys weren't getting it done at the top, which didn't help their cause.
Yeah, Yasir Shah, he was all right. Took a big bag in the first Test. Don't think he did much after that, but obviously with the rain, didn't really suit him and all that. Wasn't required in the second Test because there was no play after like day 2, and then this Test, obviously they only bowled in the first 2 days, so he was pretty irrelevant. But yeah, fair play England. They just outclassed Pakistan in all 3 areas of the game, and not too much more to talk about on that series. In terms of our votes, we've done them once again.
Yep.
My player of the series was Joss Buttler, just pipping Zach Crawley. Joss Buttler got 4 votes in the first Test and the third Test for me, and Crawley whipped out the 7, and then Rizwan was on the podium with 6 votes. He kind of dodgily picked up 5 votes in that rained out Test, and then he picked up the 1 in this final Test. I know you haven't, I don't think you've evaluated it in total yet, but do you know who your player of the series?
I don't know who the player of the series is. It's looking like either. Have you got my first Test votes up there?
Yeah, you had Wokes, then Broad, then Masood, then Butler, then Yasir.
Okay, Broad's taken it with 8 votes, and Crawley on 7 in second place.
Jeez, that's very spicy. Oh yeah, because I only gave Broad 1 in that first Test. So then once again, I'm not too sure about your rankings, but for the summer, obviously the visitors aren't really expected to win this, but I've got Broad and Butler tied on 11 votes, and then Crawley was next on 7, so actually only was required to poll in the second series. And then Stokes, obviously, he was on 5 votes, pretty dog. Wokesy actually had 6 votes as well. So, and Roston Chase and Muhammad Rizwan were tied on 6 votes, so they were the best of the visitors for me. Once again, Broad won both your series. Actually, he was 1 behind Stokes in the last one, but obviously Stokes didn't poll, so Broad would have been your winner by quite a long way, I think.
Yep.
Because Butler was only coming into the Pakistan series with 2 votes for you.
And he's only left it with.
He was actually coming in with none, and then he got 2 in the first Test. So yeah, I don't.
Yep. He's got a total of 5.
Yeah, and then Stokes was third for you on 7 votes, so he wouldn't have got any. Wokes was on 8, and I don't think he would have got any after the first Test. So I think Broady would have almost won by double the next best.
Yeah, he's blown it out.
Yeah. To be fair, if I had to pick out of Broad and Butler, I probably would go Broad. He's just dominated all series, really. He didn't do that much in the last 2 Tests, but I think, that Jimmy stood up, and he's not really going to be able to dominate every single innings when they've got a fairly good bowling attack. But yeah, Butler also deserves a huge shout out. He was coming in. We were not happy he was picked in the first Test. We weren't happy he was picked in the second Test. We weren't happy he was picked in the third Test of the first series, and he's ended up almost winning my player of the summer. So, I have to say well done to Joss. And I'm sure he'll be featured in the T20 series coming up against Pakistan and the one-day series in September against the Australians. So I'm sure there's plenty of more runs to be scored by Joss over the course of the English, summer, autumn, But yeah, anything else you want to talk about the English summer or the England-Pakistan series before we move on to the main topic of today's discussion?
No, not really. Just a shame that the rain kind of took the spotlight in the last two tests. But other than that, I think England are in a decent spot, which is always good to see.
Yeah, it is good to see. And as we mentioned before, I'm sure if you're a cricket fan and you're listening, you would have heard this by now, unless you're living under a rock. James Anderson took his 600th wicket. He is on exactly 600, I believe, because I think he needed 7 in the last test. And he took a 5 for and a 2 for. So he's sitting there on 600, first pace bowler to ever do it. Is he the third bowler ever to do it? I don't know what Kumble got.
Yeah, Kumble did get it, so he's fourth.
Yeah, 4th behind Murali, Warney, and Kumble. But yeah, obviously a lot harder for a pace bowler to get it. Spinners take bags all day long, but nothing to take away from those 3 bowlers. They're absolute legends of the game. So that's going to bring us to this discussion now. We're talking about James Anderson. We do it a lot. Obviously, we love cricket, me and Pilch. But I wanted to have a discussion today. I thought it was the perfect time to do it, given the fact that he just brought up the 600. And we're going to talk about where does James Anderson rate as one of the best pace bowlers of this century and one of the best pace bowlers of all time. So I think we're going to start with century. What we're going to do is, well, for the century, because we know he's up there, we're probably just going to talk about our top 5, and then for the best pace bowlers ever, we'll probably talk about where Jimmy comes into that list, and then our top 5 or who's above him. But yeah, so we'll start with the easy one, century. Well, you go first. Who have you got? Actually, we'll go 1 to 5. Who have you got up top?
All right, so up top for me, I've gone Glenn McGrath. His whole career wasn't in the century, but 297 wickets, average of 20.53, easily the best average, most efficient bowler. So based on that, I've got him number 1. Saw you shaking the head there. So you clearly don't rate it, but...
Nah, to be fair, he's up there for me as well, so it's not that outrageous. I'm probably overreacting, but not too many wickets there for big Glenneth. But nah, I'll cop it. Obviously insane average, and something to note with Glenn McGrath is he's by far got the best away bowling statistics of anyone who even made my consideration. He has a bowling average of 18.75 away from home this century.
Yeah,
which
outrageous.
Is I think more than 5 better than the next best. Strike rate of 46, pretty awesome. I actually had Dale Steyn on top. For me, it wasn't too difficult to choose. Obviously, Anderson has more volume than him, but the average, especially away from home, is just ridiculous. Staines is under 25, Jimmy's is up over 32. The strike rate, there's a 20 discrepancy. Staines is 45, Jimmy's is nearly 67. So for that reason alone, I didn't find it too hard to put Steyn above Anderson. And Anderson, obviously, by the way, it sounds like we're going to be crapping on Anderson this whole time, because we're not going to be having him number 1 for either. But he's obviously a legend of the game. We're not going to take that away from him. He's the first guy to get 600 wickets as a pace bowler. So we're not here just to bring him down off his pedestal after his incredible achievement. But we're just going to be serious here. We're not going to jump on the bandwagon and be saying he's the greatest of all time. We're going to seriously consider where he does rate against the others. So James Anderson is obviously famous for an insane home record. In terms of average and strike rate, Steyn actually blows him out of the water. So, that's why I've got Steyn up top. Then I've got Anderson number 2. Do you have Anderson 2 or Steyn 2?
Nah, Steyn 2. Just all the reasons you just listed, insane strike rate, especially, and average, and 439 wickets. It's just insane record. So, yeah.
Yeah. And then, statistics aside, Dale Steyn is quite comfortably the best bowler I've ever watched. Apart from Jimmy Anderson and a few spells in day-night tests, Steyn's the most dangerous bowler I've ever witnessed. He just looked like he could take a wicket at any point of any match. And I think, honestly, he made Morne Morkel and Vernon Philander look a lot better than they really were. I think they came away from their test careers with pretty spicy stats, and I think a lot of that goes down to Dale Steyn at the other end, making the batsman have a little brown liquid come down the back of that leg. I think Dale Steyn, absolute freak of nature, just so like athletic, aggressive, everything you want in a fast bowler. So he is definitely a fair shout to be up there. As I mentioned before, McGrath's up there for me, so he's actually below James Anderson. I know McGrath's a better bowler than Anderson of all time, as we'll get to in a second. But for me, it's like a 340 wicket discrepancy or something. For me, that kind of got to the point where I couldn't consider average too much because that was just too big. He only just made it past my minimum wicket threshold. But obviously, his average, and as I said before, his away average is unheard of. But I have to say, this is going to be a big point I get to in the all-time best pace bowlers. But McGrath was bowling at the other end of Shane Warne, the best bowler of all time, arguably the best cricketer of all time, behind the Don maybe. So I think a lot of, obviously he's an insane bowler. Warney's not just handing you wickets, but and it has to be said, McGrath helped Warne as well. But I think they benefited a lot from each other. Whereas, as I said before, I don't think Morkel and Philander were actually that good. I think Steyn was doing a lot of the heavy lifting for them, and James Anderson as well. Obviously, Broad's pretty good, but he's only really got elite level in the last 4 years, I think. And before then, he was bowling with some absolute magicals. I can't even think of who his permanent bowling partners were in the early 2010s. They would just kind of rotate. Yeah, like Graham Onions, Ryan Sidebottom, everyone was getting a gig. So James Anderson was kind of just the permanent in that bowling attack, and he was kind of the guy who they always went to. Yeah, so they're the main reasons I've got McGrath below Anderson, but I 100% can see why you've got McGrath up top. They're the clear top three. I think
agreed.
There's a huge fall off. Next up, I've got Stuart Broad. Very close to putting Vernon Philander in at 4, but once again, the volume. Broad's almost got more than 300 wickets, more than Philander. So, albeit Philander's averages are way better, I think Broad's volume made me go him. Once again, like Jimmy Anderson, very bad away record. Well, not bad, just not worthy of a top 5 spot. But yeah, the home record's great. And then overall, just 514 wickets. It's pretty insane. And he's only 32, so if we did this list in 5 years, who knows? Broady could be looking at that top 3, and the way he's bowling, especially, his average just keeps coming down every day.
Yep.
So he might join that top 3 tier in a few years or so. Do you have Broad at 4, or do you have Philander or someone else?
I have someone else. As you said, a pretty big drop off. I've actually listed 4 honourable mentions as well. But my number 4 spot's actually gone to another South African, Sean Pollock.
Oh,
his stats are 260 wickets, average of 24.7. He was a great bowler, especially with the new ball, but could do it in any conditions as well. And I think he's actually a bit of an underrated cricketer.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I had him in there. He was into my consideration, but I can't remember why. There was something that made me eliminate him. But yeah, he's up there in my all-time ratings, which we'll get to. So yeah, clearly a beast. Someone I can't lie, I've become a bit more intrigued in the statistical history of cricket. This year we've talked about it before on the podcast, but we made our best 11s for each decade, and that really made me have a greater appreciation for Sean Pollock. I haven't I've heard of him, but I actually just thought he was just a solid all-rounder. I didn't realize he was a top-tier opening bowler.
Yeah.
And actually, Alan Donald fits in that same category. I didn't realize how good he was as well. Pollock's very fair. So as I mentioned, I've got Philander at 5, Broad at 4. Philander, insane averages. 19 at home. That's the best home average of all the people who are in my consideration. Once again, his away record lets him down a little bit, average 28, strike rate of 64. But yeah, the main thing with him was the volume, only 224 wickets. So yeah, he's going to go down as a bit of a strange one in the history of cricket because, you know, stats buffs like me will just go sort by average, minimum 200 wickets, and then Big Vernon will be right up there with the big boys, but probably does not deserve to be in that conversation when he's just a fat little chubby kid bowling 120s. But yeah, no, that's probably a bit harsh. Sorry, Vernon, if you're listening. You're a talented cricketer. But yeah, I have to say, I actually respect medium pacers, who don't bowl 150. So I appreciate the art of it, as I bowl very slow myself. But yeah, he's in my number 5. Who's your number 5?
This is quite controversial. So I've listed four honourable mentions because of this. I know you'll bum me for this selection.
Don't say Mitchell Starc. Don't.
Mate, come on, mate. Stark's dead last on my list, mate.
Okay, that's okay then. As long as it's not Mitchell Starc, I don't mind.
But I've gone for a bloke who I believe was probably a more quality bowler than Jimmy Anderson and is pushing Stain and McGrath, but was just absolutely dogged by injuries his whole career. And his name is Shane Bond.
Oh,
Only 87 test wickets at 22.
oh my God, mate. You
100,
can't be...
150 one-day wickets at average of 20. And like, if you look up his like bowling highlights, things like that, he's just an absolute gun. And I know you love your
514 wickets.
I know you love your longevity, but there's just no way that Broad is a more talented bowler.
Yeah, but no, all right. I understand. I appreciate longevity too much, but 87 wickets. That's like 2 summers of a good bowler. Like, that's outrageous, mate.
He's a god.
I'm sorry, 87 wickets. You're pushing it there, mate. I'm about to end the potty.
But if I was going longevity, I've got written down Broad, Johnson, and then Shah Bakhtar and Pat Cummins. They're my honourable mentions. Not a fan of Philander because he's just an absolute bully in his own conditions with the new ball. As soon as the ball gets to 20 over,
got a better away record.
He's absolutely useless.
He's got a better away record than Broad and Anderson, though. So
yeah, well, that's why Broad hasn't made my list.
Yeah, my honourable mentions were Antini. He was pretty beast. He was one of my favourite cricketers growing up. Mitchell Johnson, and then Morne Morkel as well. But yeah, I think Pat Cummins and Kagiso Rabato, give it 5 years, they'll be right up there. But not definitely. Quite yet for me. But yeah, fair enough. DRS some of your calls, but I'm sure you DRS some of mine, so that's fair. We play on. All right, best pace bowlers of all time. I know you're going to have Jimmy Anderson down at 54, but come on, mate. Let me have my clickbait title of "Is Jimmy Anderson the best bowler ever?" Nah, but all jokes aside, we'll go Jimmy, and then do you want to go top 5 or top 10? Because we do have a lot.
I've only done my top 5, so
okay. Sure. Do you have honourable mentions as well, or not
really? Yeah, I've got 2.
All right. So where have you got James Anderson? Come on, rip the Band-Aid off.
He's not in my top 5, and I actually don't know where he is, but I do know that he wouldn't be in my top 10. I think he's obviously a great bowler, but
you've done the equivalent of putting Nathan Lyon above Muralitharan.
No, I haven't.
Think about it. Just sip on that one. Sip on it.
That is just a weird call.
Mate, that is legit the equivalent of what you're doing here, but that's okay.
No, but Murali has more volume than Lyon and better average.
Yeah, but his away average is probably like 600.
Nah, but that's not why I've dogged him. I just think the majority reason why he's considered so great is a case of longevity and not actually talent and skill, which he's definitely a great bowler, but in the conversation of top 10 of all time, he's not near the ball for me. There's too many blokes that have been elite.
So why isn't Mitchell Johnson your number 1 then? Because he's had the best summer of all time.
Mate, one summer is not enough. These blokes have had their whole careers of just elite level of cricket. Yeah,
but that's what Jimmy did. He just did it longer.
Mate, Jimmy's had Ashes series where he's averaged 45, mate. So not having a bar of him. And I'll say this now: none of my top 5 of the century and made my top 5 of all time.
I just want to say to those listening who don't know Pilch very well, the man. So I'm not trying to undermine your picks here. You're very knowledgeable about cricket, arguably a lot more knowledgeable than me. But you do have one of the largest historical biases I've ever seen. I think if you had your time again, you wish you could have been born in the 1960s. So, but I have to say, I do counterbalance it. So this show makes a perfect combination of cricket conversation because I'm the opposite. I hate old people. But yeah, carry on. I just wanted to point that out to give some context to the listeners why I might be bickering you for your choices, even though they're probably very fair. But yeah, carry on.
Well, I'll compare Anderson to someone, Anil Kumble. It's a case of longevity and not actually being an absolute wizard.
It's true. Yeah, no, I don't mind that comparison. Yeah, I think it's still that comparison's still a bit harsh on James Anderson, but yeah, if you put it that way, I do understand.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's why he's not made in my top 5 or my top 10.
Yeah. Do you know, like, would he be top 20 or are you like seriously that low?
I'd back him to be top 20.
Yeah. All right. Now, fair enough. I've actually, all right, this is controversial. Don't hate me. But as I mentioned, a lot of these dudes have a little bowling partner next to them, and two great bowlers make each other awesome. Okay. Like, as you know, you've played a bit of cricket yourself. I play a bit of cricket myself. When you've got one good bowler, it's not even hard if there's an absolute baker at the other end just leaking runs because you just see that guy off and then you just go to town at the other end. The worst thing is when you've got a gun bowler and then you've got someone who's just like tightening the screws at the other end. It's almost impossible to score. You're bound to play a stupid shot. One of the famous bowling opening partnerships from our school's history, one of them was like a Victorian under-19 opening bowler bowling 140s. The other guy at the other end took like the most wickets in an APS season or something. It was like that combination is so hard to play. It's someone who's bowling gas, high quality. The other's just tightening the screws, or also bowling gas at high quality for some of these dudes. But yeah, I've gone Jimmy at number 5 just because I think the volume of his wickets can't be understated. I know some of these guys have only taken 300 wickets, but they've done it at a better rate than James Anderson. But for him to be a step below, albeit, but for him to do it for 600 wickets, I think that's pretty insane. And also, obviously, I'm not factoring this in, but just in terms of this conversation in the future, I think James Anderson still has another 50 plus wickets in him. He said in an interview last night, that he can't see why he can't get to 700, which I think would once again make this conversation have to be redone because all of a sudden the volume increases. But yeah, I've gone with him at 5. One of the main reasons is that he hasn't had a bowling partner the whole of his career. Unlike a lot of these guys, you've got, Walker and Wasim, you've got Ambrose and Walsh, you've got Marshall and Garner, Pollock and Donald, McGrath and Warren. Like pretty much all these dudes have a bowling partner who is sitting in the top 20 with them. Whereas Anderson doesn't. Broad, yes, the last few years he's probably been better than Anderson, but for the majority of Anderson's career, he was seriously carrying his team. He was bowling with just a rotation of other bowlers who weren't really good enough to be there. So I think that's also one of the reasons why his stats are seriously average in terms of the bowling average, especially away from home, because like the batting team could just see him out and then not let him take wickets, which affects his stats. And also something else, in the last 20 years, a lot of things have changed, which have improved the batting conditions. Pitches have now become genuine concrete in most countries. So we joke about James Anderson being rubbish at the Ashes, but dead set, who is not these days, except for the Australian quicks. Rabada's probably the other guy who's come here and like look damaging because the pitches are just so hard for bowlers. Bowling in the Middle East has obviously never suited, not the Middle East, the subcontinent, has never suited pace bowlers, and it still doesn't. And now South Africa, the West Indies, they're all like dead in terms of pace bowling pitches. England's the only place where a pace bowler can thrive, which is obviously the reason why James's home average is so good. And then the final reason, the bats have got bigger. The total average runs have got more. Nowadays, a 250 in an innings, that's bad. You're well below par, where back in like the 70s and 80s, a 250 wasn't that bad. You could really set up a test with a 250. So they're the reasons why I've got James Anderson. I know I sound like I'm seriously on the back foot here, but I just want to justify it because if you do compare the stats, it does seem pretty stupid for him to be in the top 5, but that's why I've got him at 5th. So yeah, there's a few guys below him that are seriously unlucky, but they had a great bowling partner, they bowled in better conditions, and they don't have the volume. So they're the main reasons. But who is your number? We'll go 5-1 for this one for a bit of sauce. Who's number 5?
Well, this is another bloke this is probably the prime example of someone that's carried not only their entire bowling attack, but their entire nation for a period of about 15 years. Sir Richard Hadlee, 431 wickets, average of 22.3. I mean, he was just absolutely unreal. Carried New Zealand for 15 years. He's right up there for the most tenfers, which is a good start to look at if you want to see who's actually carrying their attack. You see other bowlers like Glenn McGrath who only have like three. There you go, 3 career tenfers.
Yeah,
and that's because
Hadley's rolling with 9. So
yeah,
he's dominating.
And I'm pretty sure he's in the 30s or something for fifers. Sir Richard,
36.
Yeah. So yeah, he's my number 5. And
and as you said, I think he played for quite a long time, but especially at the time, it wasn't as popular, especially for pace bowlers to play that long. But yeah, most fifers I've got a list of 20 here, most fifers out of them all, most tenfers out of them all. And one thing that really impressed me about Richard Hadlee is his bowling away record's actually better than his home record. And New Zealand's not like Glenn McGrath. Obviously, it's still impeccable that he's got that away record, but you kind of would understand because Australia's not great for pace bowlers. But New Zealand's pretty bloody good for pace bowlers. So I think that's a serious credit to him that he's got a better bowling average away from home. But yeah, I'll be honest. Sir Richard Hadlee is my number 1. I've put him number 1 for everything you've mentioned.
I knew you'd have him somewhere.
The main factor, I don't know why I've got so caught up on this morning, but it just came to me this morning. I've never really thought about this. He bowled with absolutely no one else. I was looking at the team he was dealing with. No one else had an average above 30. I think him and Chris Cairns played for like 1 year. And that was like the only taste of another good bowler he got. I'm sure like they were all good bowlers, but like their records aren't great. I think he played with Doug Bracewell's dad or something, and he had a bowling average of like 35. And then there was these 2 other dudes, I don't know their name, all averages above 30. So Hadlee was doing it absolutely all for his country. And yeah, that's why I've got him at number 1, really. Just absolutely carried his team, where pretty much everyone else in contention for this had someone else at the other end, but he was doing it absolutely all for himself. So yeah, that's why I've got him number 1. It's pretty controversial. I'm sure a lot of cricket tragics and traditionalists are yelling at their laptops, phones, whatever right now. But sorry, John Pilcher, if he's listening, I'm sure he's not happy with that one. But he probably thinks seeing both should be number 1. But nah, I honestly do think Hadlee, when you take into account those factors, should be right up there with the best. But yeah, obviously you're high on him as well. You've got him number 5, so I respect that. All right, I've got Anderson at 5, as I mentioned. Who's your number 4?
My number 4, you definitely won't have this bloke because his stats probably aren't quite as good as some of these other guys. But
don't have a bloke with like 50 wickets, please.
Don't worry, mate. I'm not putting Shane. I'm not putting Shane Bond in my top 5 of all time.
Thanks, mate. I appreciate it.
But another measure of greatness is the impact or the ability you have to like change the face of the sport, and that's exactly what D.K. Lilly did in the 70s. He pretty much single-handedly made cricket like Australia's biggest sport in the 1970s and brought loads of fans single-handedly. Obviously, an impeccable bowler as well. 355 wickets, average of 23.9. Good, decent average away as well. I think 25 or 26. And yeah, he was
It's actually less than
beast.
that. It's like 24.
Oh well, there you go, even better. But yeah, and as well as that, he had what was like a career-ending back injury for most people, but he came back from it, and he came back pretty much better than he was before. Got right back up to the top. So yeah, he was an absolute beast.
Yeah, I can't lie. He's not in my top 10. I haven't ranked my outsiders in my top 10, but I've got 4 blokes sitting outside my top 10, and he is one of them. But I've just gone purely statistical, and when you look at it that way, it is very true. Although he did bowl with some good bowlers, he bowled with Tomo. I think he might have bowled with Terry Alderman for a little bit.
Yeah, he did.
I don't know that, and I think maybe Bruce Reid as well. I don't know the exact timeline. Maybe Craig McDermott's probably too young for him, but yeah, so they were good cricketers, but once again he didn't have that set partner at the other end, just tying them up. DK Lilly was the front; he was the talisman of the Australian team at that time, and yeah, as you said, he's just a legend of the game. Everyone knows who DK Lilly is. I genuinely reckon you could just say DK, and people know who you're talking about. Maybe they'll think Donkey Kong or something, but DK Lilly's synonymous with the game, especially here in Australia. I think the listeners would be pretty happy with that one. Your Broadbench, your Grenders, they're the kind of people.
Shout out to Broady.
Yeah, like Australians would just they just love Dennis Lilly. He's a cult figure. My dad, he's actually kind of a weird Australian. He probably rates Jeff Thompson over him, but similar to you, he kind of goes on personal experience as opposed to stats. And I think he was sculpted by a few Thompson clinics that he witnessed. But yeah, no, Dennis Lilly, great shout. I like it. I like that change of direction. In number 4, this was a very late. He was down in my honourable mention. I think he was down at like 8th, and then I just went, you know what, back him in. Alan Donald. I've got him in number 4. Yeah, bowling average of 22.25, 330 wickets. So he's got the least wickets out of my top 5. But yeah, just a superstar. His bowling average home and away didn't really change. I think there was like a 1 discrepancy, which is nothing in cricket. Strike rate of 49.3 away from home. 8.85 is 110 for away from home, which is pretty insane. And also he was probably someone who I tried to be a little bit less statistically orientated. Obviously the stuff I just read out, that's impeccable, but we were watching some videos the other month of Alan Donald. It looks absolutely cooked. Like usually the bowlers you watch from the 70s and 80s, you kind of like, doesn't look that fast. But Alan Donald looks absolutely rapid.
Yeah.
He looks so scary. He's such a scary bloke.
Yeah, that video of him bowling to, I think, Athers at Trent Bridge or something, he was just absolutely terrorizing the poor bastard.
Yeah, he was so good. But yeah, obviously the stats probably could get him in the top 5 alone, but I think Donald was an absolute superstar of South African cricket.
Yeah.
He was, this is a big call, but I don't know exactly, because I don't know exactly the timeline, but he was probably like the first star of South African cricket post like their comeback to the international scene. And obviously a lot of them started coming through with like Sean Pollock and stuff like that. But I don't know like the history of South African cricket or if he did this, but like I would have imagined he would have brought a lot of South Africans back to cricket with some of his fiery spells and exciting bowling. But yeah, I've got him in at number 4. Sean Pollock actually got dropped by me for Alan Donald, so stiff there, Shauno. Sean Pollock's my number 6, if you were wondering. South Africa, do you reckon South Africa's the best pace bowling country of all time?
Definitely up there. I think the West Indies would have something to say about it, but
yeah,
South Africa definitely a shout.
Yeah, I think maybe in 20 years, I think South Africa might guarantee that crown, but maybe right now you'd probably still go West Indies. But I think once Ngidi, Rabada, all them finish it up, I think they'll be number 1 on top. Maybe Pakistan a 3rd spot, or Australia. I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I also do think recently, especially South Africa, have been impacted a lot by like the cold pack, Obviously, you got blokes like Kyle Abbott, Dwayne Olivier playing over there who could easily be playing for South Africa and tearing stuff up. I know Kyle Abbott before he was not that good, and then like legit the 3 months before he became a ENGvPAK player. So to those wondering, ENGvPAK is when a South African like signs with a county team, and I'm not 100% sure why, but it rules them out of playing for South Africa. It's like this weird contract deal they have, but that rule's actually changing. I think it has something. It like doesn't count as an overseas player for the county or something. It's some weird stuff like that. It's a rule. It's an agreement England and South Africa have. But yeah, Kyle Abbott, he is a ENGvPAK player, and 3 months before he decided to do that, he was like tearing it up on the test scene, and then ever since he's been tearing it up. I think he plays for Hampshire. But I think ENGvPAK's getting abolished next year once Brexit is put into play, but I'm not 100% sure on that one either. Anyway, that's a weird tangent from me. But yeah, great producer of fast bowling talent. And I might have another one in my top 3. Ooh, spicy cork. Who's your number 3?
My number 3, another bloke that just had a huge impact on the sport as a whole, and you probably would have rated him fairly highly. Not sure if he's made your thing, but he did carry his nation as player and captain before Wasim and Wakar came onto the scene. But I've gone Imran Khan, 362 wickets, average of 22.8. Pioneered the concept of reverse swing. Didn't invent it, but definitely made it a huge thing, especially in Pakistan, and then taught it to the likes of Wasim and Wakar. But yeah, he's a cult figure in the sport of cricket, especially in his nation. Current Prime Minister of Pakistan as well, for those playing at home. But yeah, absolute star of the game.
He's probably one of the earliest like celebrities of cricket. He was like famously with, I don't think he still is, but he was with like a supermodel or something in England, and he was like known for being a sexy rooster, a fashion icon, and now obviously he was popular enough to be voted in as Prime Minister of the Pakistan nation. But yeah, that's obviously all off field, but his on field does the talking really.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, his stats are insane. One thing I've probably got against Imran Khan, his away average isn't as good as some of the others. He had a bowling average of 25.76 away from home. But obviously, as we've talked about, that's still way better than like your Jimmy Andersons, your Stuart Broads and stuff like that. So that's probably one thing against him. That's probably why I didn't make my top 5. He was also in that Lily section outside the top 10. But I have to say, I probably would reconsider it because, as you did mention, he was before Wakar and was it. So he didn't have like anyone, I don't know too much about before Pakistan before that time, but I don't think he had any other quicks doing the damage with him. But yeah, legend of the game. Number 3, I've got Glenn McGrath. I'm sure you've got him a little bit higher than number 3. But yeah, I've got Glenn McGrath at number 3. Just legend of the game. We already basically talked about it in the decade stuff, but away average is insane. Away strike rate's insane. I think he's taken the most away wickets. Oh no, Courtney Walsh has 15 more, but he's right up there for the most away wickets of all time. He's actually taken more away wickets than Jimmy Anderson, which is pretty surprising, given the fact that James Anderson's the first pace bowler to 600. But yeah, Glenn McGrath, legend of the game. Second most pace bowling wickets of all time, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's correct. But yeah, I'm sure you'll have a little bit more to say on him when he's your number 1. But but Glenn McGrath, legend. I'm probably a little bit anti Glenn McGrath, not sure why. Just the vibe I get off myself. But yeah, he's a legend in the game. Known kind of the only bloke of his kind in this list. He wasn't rapid. He was very economical, tied down an end. He was famous for like just pitching it on off stump, making them play, pitching it like an inch outside off stump, making them play, and then just going over and over until they edge one, and all of a sudden they're playing one at 2 feet outside off stump, looking like an absolute idiot. So yeah, he just made batsmen look silly, and him and Warren were probably the greatest bowling partnership of all time. So yeah, here's my number 3. Who's your number 2? Is it Glenneth or is he snagging the number 1?
Well, you're actually wrong about Glenneth, mate. He's my honourable mention.
Ooh, you love Glenneth though.
Yeah, I did a poll on my Insta, if you remember. It was DK Lilly versus Glenn McGrath, and I actually voted for DK Lilly. But
Sorry, I didn't remember that.
No, not surprising. No one remembers that. No one actually voted in it. But anyway, these next two blokes are the two blokes I always have as my typical answer for the best two pace bowlers of all time. This bloke at number 2, you will be disgusted, as you always are.
Can I predict?
Yeah.
This is bold. I'm going Wazim number 2, Malcolm Marshall number 1. That's who I'm guessing. But carry on.
One from two. Number 2,
I'll take it.
I've actually got him up on my wall in my room. The great SF Barnes from the from the pre-World War One times.
Bowled to dinosaurs.
He's historically known as the greatest bowler of all time by many cricket historians.
Jesus is also historically known as a great bloke as well.
189 wickets at an average of 16. He wouldn't have made your minimum wicket requirement, but that's because they played about a tenth as much Test cricket in those days as they do now. So if you look at some of these blokes' first class records, they're rolling with 2,000 wickets at an average of 12. But
so what is his Test average? Sorry,
16.43.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
And obviously they only versed Australia and South Africa in those days, and the pre-World War One Australian batting lineup is actually known as the golden age of Australian batting, and he tore them up on a regular basis. Some great batsmen like Victor Trumper, for the great grandfathers out there that remember that bloke. But yeah, he's come in at number 2, and you may have snagged my number 1 with your guess before, but.
Yeah, I think it's physically impossible for anyone to be listening to this to have watched Victor Trumper.
Yeah.
Not sure if the ages line up there.
It's physically impossible unless you're in the Guinness World Book of Records. But
yeah, I have to say, when we did do our decades thing, we did discover that you and me have very varying opinions on pre-World War II cricket. I'm very, very skeptical of it. I almost compare it to biblical studies, but I probably shouldn't lose my religious viewers, but I don't know. There's too many question marks going there. I just can't confidently place him in a list like this. I don't want to dog blokes for someone who might not even be a real person.
All I'll say is, if it weren't for them, cricket today wouldn't be as we know it. So you've got to pay your respects.
Yeah. Someone's got to be the first to do it. So I am quite disrespectful, but I'm open and honest about that.
I forgot to mention, he also invented the art of the off and leg cutter. So I'll throw that in there as well.
Yeah, but it does have to be mentioned that they were playing on paddocks, and I'm sure the pitch wasn't too dissimilar to the outfield. But I'm not going to dog your decision. He is known as, what didn't they call him, like the first demon?
No, that was Fred Spofford.
Oh, Spofford, Frederick Spofford. But as I did those stats of the early history of cricket, I did see that SF Barnes was a freak of nature. But yeah, just not my cup of tea, but I 100% respect the call. For me, my number 2 is Dale Steyn. Pretty bold choice. I don't think he would be in many people's top 10s, let alone top 5s. But for me, once again, like Glenn McGrath, just the away average is so good. It's below 25, which nowadays in cricket is unheard of. Nowadays, an away average of around 30 is probably stock standard. But yeah, just insane. Just from first-hand experience of first-hand experience of watching him. He just used to turn games around with frightening spells. Similar to Alan Donald, it was not just like the actual physical ball he delivered. It was everything about him. He was aggressive, scary, fast. Just so good. I can see why people would have the likes of Glenn McGrath or something above him in terms of the modern era. But I'm going Steyn above McGrath. McGrath can cop. But yeah, Steyn, as I mentioned before, with James Anderson being my number 5, batting conditions have only gotten sweeter in the last 20 years, and Steyn had to bowl in the heart of that. and he did pretty bloody well at it. So yeah, he's my number 2. Pretty controversial, but I'll do it. Your number 1 might have my number 1's Richard Hadley, so we don't need to talk about him. But Sir Richard Hadley, sorry. But who's your number 1? We may have alluded to it earlier, but go on. Fraser will be very impressed with you, by the way. He's Fraser's favourite cricketer of all time, I think.
Is he really? Yeah. Well,
I think so.
you guessed him right before. It's the great Malcolm Marshall. Not your typical like alpha, frightening personality of a fast bowler. He was more on the humble, quiet side, but lightning quick, pretty small for an insanely quick bowler. But yeah, just ridiculous stats.
Very small for an insanely quick bowler.
Yeah,
unheard of stuff.
Which is very
incredible.
Impressive. But it made his bounces go to the throat, which the batsman absolutely hated. But 376 wickets, average of 20.9. He did have good pace attack partners, but it was getting to the end of Joel Garner and then the start of Curtly Ambrose. So he was always the alpha, despite having good partners. He was always the alpha in the attack, and just an incredible bowler. And he's always my number 1 when posed with this conundrum.
Yeah, Dad always tells you stories about Malcolm Marshall, who just seems incredible. It's actually a bit of a hard one to say, Malcolm Marshall. But yeah, I think he's like known for a really long run up, and he used to just charge in. I'm pretty sure his run up was like almost at the boundary at some grounds. But yeah, he was just a rapid bowler. I think he was only like 5'9" or something.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah.
Which is just insane when your Curtly Ambroses, your Courtney Walshes, they're like 6'4", 6'5". So yeah, I love Malcolm Marshall. I haven't watched much of him or anything, but just the idea of him gets me going. So yeah, once again, he just missed my top 5. Probably not enough volume, and I did factor in. Like I can't lie, I didn't look at it closely, but I did think, oh well, he bowled a lot with Joel Garner, then he copped Ambrose and Walsh, as you said. But yeah, he's probably was bang in between, so I can't really put that against him. So retrospectively, I would have liked to have him in my top 5, but yeah, I've got him sitting at 8th. I have to say though, I think we've had some pretty unique top 5s there. I don't think many. I don't think many would not have Ambrose, Walsh, Akram, and Yunus. So apologies to the Pakistani and West Indian listeners out there. Yeah, so they were probably the 4 closest to my top 5. Oh, Pollock, as I mentioned, he was right up there. But yeah, Ambrose, Marshall, Walsh, Wasim Akrim, Waka, Yunus, Imran Khan, Dennis Lilly, Fred Truman. They were like my top 20. What really went against Ambrose, Walsh, Akram, Yunus is they had each other. I guess you can make that argument for McGrath. You can make that argument for everyone in that list, basically. But yeah, when you've got another top 10 of all time at the other end, I think it doesn't take away from your achievements, but I think it makes other people's achievements better, if you know what I mean. So yeah, apologies to those 4. I know they're keen listeners of the On the Ball Potty, but you've been dogged today. But to be fair, you've made the top 10 of all time. That's still pretty handy. You still know the game mechanics. But yeah, anything else you want to say about these lists?
I'll give 3 honourable mentions to my top 5.
All right, let rip, brother.
It'd be Glenn McGrath, definitely next on the list. He was pretty.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. You love McGrath. Well, you don't love him, but you really rate him.
Yeah, I rate him highly. But to be fair, number 6 of all time, can't be too displeased with that.
Exactly.
Glenn McGrath.
Come on, Glenn.
And then Wasim and Curtly Ambrose, and then I'll give a shout out to Stain and Anderson as well for carrying the current crop.
Yeah, Walsh is probably a bit stiff, just given the volume, but as you alluded to there, I think he was the beta of that partnership. I think Ambrose was the mad dog.
Definitely.
Probably similar in the Akram Yunus partnership as well. I think Wasim was the better cricketer, but all superstars, obviously. I think everyone will have a different top 5. I think it'll be hard to find 2 people pick the same top 5. But yeah, I'm interested to see how this list evolves over our lifetime, really. Keen to see whether your Rabatas, your Cummins could have a nudge at it, or yeah. It's going to be hard, I reckon, to compare bowling stats of this generation to 70s, 80s, because I think nowadays, just the way cricket has gone, I think you've got to cut them a little bit more slack.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think Paddy Cummins is going to retire with a bowling average of like 21, but I don't know if he's necessarily a worse cricketer than some of these guys. But yeah, I do think that might swing the other way though again, because I think T20 is affecting a lot of people's Test cricket skill sets. It's
It's a shame.
we're seeing less and less big scores, but yeah, it's actually a good time in cricket again. It's slowly coming back. The CPL's on right now. Shubron Hetmeyer is tearing shit up, as we love to see. I think Ross Taylor's over there, Chris Lynn's over there, Ben Dunk's over there. There's a lot of guys over there. Colin Munro. So that's pretty exciting. One team has Majib, Sandeep Lamashane, and Andre Russell. I'm like, how's that even legal? But yeah, it's a serious bowling attack. And then there's obviously the county cricket Bob Willis Trophy. That's on like every week, so that's pretty exciting. I've got votes going for both those tournaments, but I'm not going to bring them up because I'm a little bit behind on them. And then the IPL starts. I think it starts in 2 weeks. I think it's like the longest IPL of all time or something. But yeah, who knows what's going on there. But I think all the world's best is going to be there. So that'll be good to watch. But yeah, thanks for joining me again, Pilch.
No worries, mate. Pleasure as always.
Hope you've enjoyed listening to it. If you have, show us some appreciation, like, subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff. Next up, we've got a US Open preview in the tennis. And then next week, we've got some soccer episodes and some more NFL fantasy content. So stay tuned. I'm excited for it all. It's a good time to be a sports fan at the moment. It's absolute chaos. So I'm loving it. Anyway, thanks for listening and see you later.